The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of Spaced Out Radio or Spaced Out Radio Limited is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced?
Stop right there!
From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
They let us play with all our toys. They let us think that we're big boys. They let us make a lot of noise, but women rule the world. They let us think we're Superman.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on iTunes and TuneIn. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show.
I try to act so cool, but you know I'm just a fool for you. For you. I will stop till I reach the top just to be there with you.
Dave, oh Dave, are you playing with Bigfoot and aliens again?
Dad, you gotta stop haunting the ghost. It's scaring them.
All right, seriously, put down the pointy sticks.
Oh, the deeper I fall.
Okay! Game on! Game on! Game on!
The password is...
All right.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio. Mr. Bumblefoot, Dave is ready for liftoff.
I try to act so cool, but you know I'm just a fool for you.
Seriously, Dave? Really? Aren't you a little old for a tinfoil hat?
Hello, Toby. Bye-bye. Nephew. Bye-bye.
Yeah, just please take your seat about it. We're at the entrance. It's time for pickup. Start. 2, 1. Boost ignition and lift off.
I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall. The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. It's great to have you along for the ride on this Tuesday, October 24th. Wednesday, October 25th. If you're on the East Coast or across the pond, hope you had a great day and night. We are live right here in the Great White North on top of the mountains of central British Columbia, as we are here for your listening needs 7 nights a week. We welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of the Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and over 160 countries around the world. We are also live on spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, KTLK, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. If you like our music, get your horns up for Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy. Bumblefoot is the official music of this show. Now, we're all over social media, so I need you to follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Listen to us on iHeartRadio in the United States. TalkStream Live, tune us in on TuneIn, download this show, and subscribe to our shows on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. Now, if you want to take part in this show, you got to do me a favor. You have to sign into one of the chat rooms. You got to go on Spreaker, Rev Radio, UPRN's chat room, or on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club, where I was just thrown in Facebook jail moments ago. Once again, I don't understand how Facebook gets me for spamming when it's in my own room. I don't get that. But I'm in Facebook jail. But you have to go in there and chat away. Or if you're on Twitter, just use the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. I will get to your questions and comments in there as well. Now, if you head to our website for $5 a month, you can become an SOR Space Traveler. You can also shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. Read the encounter online. Check out my latest blog. If you've had a sighting you can't explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Or you can watch great videos from UFO seekers Tim Doyle and Leslie Mitchell Clark's Contact TV. Glad to have you with us tonight on SOR as we welcome back for his bi-monthly guest appearance, David Weatherly, author and one of the premier voices in the world of the strange. David has been investigating the strangeness of our planet for well over 30 years. Why he does it? Well, it's like the rest of us who want to know what's going on. David has a curiosity that gives him the desire to find the answers to the obtuse occurrences that are happening on this planet. David has numerous books on Amazon and every major bookstore dealing with topics from the paranormal with ghosts and demons to Sasquatch, aliens, and the infamous black-eyed kids. There isn't a topic he won't look into or chase down. Tonight we're going to get into some serious storytelling as David is one of the best when it comes to detailing the sights people are having on a nightly basis. Dave, welcome back to Spaced Out Radio. How you been, my friend?
Hey, man, it's good to be back as always, and yeah, I've been busy. It's a busy time of year for me, and my head's kind of spinning. I've been on the road for almost, well over 2 months or something. So, yeah, lots of stuff going on.
Where have you been running around?
Well, I had a number of conferences that I appeared at. In the fall, I spoke at Cryptid Con in Kentucky. I was at the Mothman Festival as a speaker this year, and that's always a good time. That's in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I was in Vegas for the grand opening of Zach's Haunted Museum. Man, that place is incredible. I've been to Vermont. I've been back and forth all over this country, and I literally just got back a couple of days ago. I was in Ocean City, Maryland, because my group, Society of the Supernatural, investigated the Ripley's Museum again there. And we did a live stream event with that on Friday and Saturday night. And that was pretty cool.
Well, we got to get you up here, man. We got to get you up here to check out some of the hauntings and the Sasquatch and UFO activity that's happening up here. You know, you got to
I'm up for it, man. I know you guys had all that trouble with those wildfires and everything this year, so you know, I'm glad you made it through safely.
Yeah, me too. It saddened me because you were actually going to be coming up to the Paracon for our event with Ross Allison, and then all of a sudden, boom, we had to cancel it due to the wildfires. But I'll tell you right now, I'll let you in on a little secret, Dave. We're planning already on doing it next year, September 28th through the 30th. So you got to make sure you got those dates open, because we're going to bring you on up here.
Okay. I know that Ross and I were all ready to come up and creep your audience out with some stories about haunted toys. So,
absolutely.
We'll see if we can make that happen this year.
Well, you know what? I'm looking forward to it, because 2018, we're looking for bigger and better things coming from this show and from everything that we are doing up here. And I'll tell you, man, I don't know if you saw the photograph or not that we got back in September of the ghost on the stairway from the barn that we do our haunted tour on. But man, we got a lot of attention with that one.
I have not seen that. You'll have to shoot it over to me. I'd like to look at it.
You know what? While we're talking here, I will text it on over to you. And, Dave, it's one of those things, man, where it literally scared the bejesus out of a lot of people. The lady who caught the photo was a complete skeptic, someone who absolutely had no intention of actually even wanting to go on our tour, but only did because her best friend wanted to take the tour, didn't want to do it alone. So I'm just sending it over to you right now. That's a zoomed in version. It's the
Those
dude.
are the perfect people to catch those kind of things.
Yeah. but you know what's funny is the amount, when we put it online, we got probably about 90% of the people saying, wow, that was an amazing photo. You got to be kidding me. That's real? And we're like, yeah, that is absolutely 100% real. When that photo was taken, there was not a soul on that stairway. But it's amazing how the armchair critics come out.
Oh, yeah.
How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that?
For the most part, I ignore it, to tell you the truth, Dave, because I've long said that I haven't been in the field for so long. A lot of people approach me and, that are newcomers to the field, and they ask questions, and, a lot of times they ask for advice, how do you handle this? How do you handle that? And one of the things I often talk about with those people is, I ask them what their motivation is for being in the field. And, why exactly are they pursuing these things? And, when I have a newbie kind of tell me that, well, he's in the field he or she's in the field to, prove to people that ghosts exist or something like that. I always try to gently help them understand that they're going to have a tough road, because, frankly, you might be pounding your head against the concrete if you're going to try to convince a skeptic. There's the old adage that a believer doesn't need proof, and nothing will ever convince a skeptic. And there's a good percentage of people out there that they've already decided on some level in their minds. And, doesn't matter one way or the other what's shown to them, they're going to believe what they're going to believe. And you've got, a very small gray area of people who are open-minded enough to say, well, I don't know, maybe there are ghosts, maybe they're not. So, those people, maybe you'll convince them. But you got these other people out there that just have such an agenda to, try to debunk anything and everything. And, they sit in mom's basement or whatever on the computer, and they crank out this stuff because they can do it anonymously in today's world, And the world of the internet has given us a lot of good things, but it's also given us a lot of, really despicable behavior. And people will say and do things that, gosh, when you and I were a little bit younger, people never would have thought of doing those kind of things. And to a certain degree, you just have to kind of burn stuff off. You have to, the more well-known you are in this field, I think the thicker your skin has to become. Because there's always somebody, no matter how nice you are, no matter how, fair and even you try to be, there's always going to be somebody that doesn't like what you're doing. And they're going to, make nasty comments or say whatever. Rather than say, hey, I'd love to see more of the data on this photograph, or more, I'd love to see the location, ask the questions that show they genuinely want to try to understand what the phenomenon was, no, they're just going to criticize it and say, oh, that's a, reflection or your imagination or, whatever.
No, absolutely, and we got a lot of that. And you know what? It's funny because a lot of the people who were saying very positive things about it were people whom I know listen to this show. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And
sure.
it's funny, the people who were the most critical about it, I don't even think they've even heard of the show before because, not to pat my own back, Dave, but we're trying to build something worth credibility here. And if somebody is out there saying, that it's that it's fake, or we put a cardboard cutout up there to grab attention or something along those lines, that's my show. That it has the reputation online. Now, people will say, well, you shouldn't take it so personally, but as a media outlet, I'm not going to try and BS the audience or my followers on social media. Now, I did have some people who were genuinely interested and genuinely looking into the photograph and saying, well, you know what, can you analyze this a little bit further? Which we have. We have not been able to recreate it at all. And it's funny because the people who aren't listening were the ones who were most critical about it. And I found that very entertaining.
Yeah, and that's the best approach, is to just be entertained by it. Quite honestly, that's one of the ways to deal with it. I mean, the other factor you have to consider is that these people really, unless they ask you a series of questions or unless they were present during the incident, they don't know, to what extent you vetted that photograph or, that location, that those circumstances. And it really is hard to convey all of that. If we're presenting this information, whether it's, via the internet or on television or however we're doing it, we really have a limited amount of time and space in which to show the audience, hey, here's what we captured. Most people would not sit there and watch the hours that you spend trying to figure out, okay, exactly how did this happen? You just have to present it and let people take it for what it is and tell them what the circumstances were. But I'll give you a great example, actually. As I said, we were just at Ripley's in Ocean City, Maryland. Society of Supernatural just added a new member, Ross Allison. I know you've had him on the show. He's my co-author on Haunted Toys. And Ross is a great guy. He's got extensive experience in the field. And, I one of the things I really like about Ross is that he is, I wouldn't call him a skeptic, but he really takes such a hard look at things. We all have unique approaches in this field, and there are some things in terms of equipment that Ross likes to use and some things he doesn't, and that's okay. I'm fine with having differences with some of those things because it gives a different viewpoint. But man, when Ross, and on a number of occasions this year, I've seen Ross have an experience or capture something, and it's pretty cool to kind of watch it and see, how he tries to rationalize it in a sense. So we were at Ripley's in Ocean City, and we had Ross do a solo session. It's in an area of the museum that contains torture implements. And Ross was sitting on the floor. He only had a couple of pieces of equipment with him. He had a thermal camera. And Dave, he caught this image. I posted it on my Instagram. Check it out. It's on my Facebook page too. Still shot of this thermal image of a shadow figure. And it is, it is a humanoid figure. And, we were all blown away by this. We, of course, analyzed the capture, and we tried, to rationalize it. We spent time, looking over the details of where he was, where the camera was pointing, what's there. There's nothing. There's no explanation in terms of the space or the environment, there's nothing there that you can replicate that with. It is a genuine capture of some kind of something manifesting. The coolest thing is that right before this manifestation, Ross was asking whatever spirit was in there to show itself to him. So right on the heels of this request, he captures this incredible image. And, to kind of get back to your point, I mean, we posted that image and, we talked about it, of course, during the live stream and we showed it, live during the live stream event. But, we didn't show people all the time. We spent analyzing that space and going back over it and looking at all the finer details, trying to determine, okay, is there anything else this could have been? Because, that's frankly, to most people, that would be really boring. So nobody's going to sit and watch that. People don't sit and watch, Ghost Adventures or whatever paranormal show to see all the, slow, tedious analysis of whatever evidence. They watch it for those high points of what happens. And we spent a lot of hours in Ripley's Friday and Saturday night, and that was definitely, one of the high points in terms of evidence capture. That's the most incredible thing during that investigation. We were there all weekend.
It's amazing when you can get what you can get, rather, when you least expect it. And what's funny, Dave, is one of the gentlemen, and I'm not going to say who it was, but he does a lot of work for MUFON as well in studying photographs. I said to him online during this conversation, as he was debating me about the photo potentially being faked, I said, well, I'm authenticating it. And he says, what gives you the authority to authenticate it? I said, number one, I literally, he goes, what gives you the authority to authenticate it? That makes you sound like every other person out there who is trying to pass off that something is real. And I said to him point blank, I said, come on, you're better than that. I said, don't even go there. I said, why would I put my show's reputation on the line and my personal reputation in this field on the line if it was false? I said, that doesn't make sense as I'm trying to make a business out of this show. I said, you're better than that. I said, come on. But that's the ego that we have in this field, that if that certain person doesn't authenticate it, it's not real. That everything has to go through that person. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
And there's too much of that in this field.
Right. Well, I mean, there's, I think, fewer and fewer people who kowtow to that kind of attitude, and that's a good thing, ultimately. It's good to have colleagues that we can talk to about these things and show it. I mean, things like that, I feel confident that I've got a group of people that I can, if I capture something like that, I can shoot it over to them and say, hey, what do you think about this? After I draw my own conclusions, I get other perspectives from individuals that I respect and have affiliation with, and who I know will be honest with me and maybe give me a different perspective. And man, when that small group of people looks at it and says, man, this is a genuine capture, then that's enough for me, quite frankly.
I know you're on your cell phone right now. I don't know if you can go to your text messages or not and look at the two photos. The second one I sent you is the original, and the first one I sent you is actually the zoomed in. I'm very curious to get your opinion on that. Since
it looks like it's not. Sometimes I can access them, and sometimes I can't. So it looks like I can't at the moment.
All right. Well, we'll try during the break and go from there. It is getting closer to Halloween. You mentioned you were at Zach Bagan's opening of his new haunted museum. What's that like walking in there for people who haven't been to Vegas yet to take that tour?
Oh, man. If you have any interest in the paranormal, you got to visit this place. Hands down. Zach has really outdone himself. This thing was a long time opening. And, a lot of anticipation, a lot of build up for it. And, I'll tell you, Dave, it was well worth the wait. It is located in a historic district of Las Vegas. The building that it's in is the Wingert Mansion, which is actually haunted itself, quite fitting. And as some people may know, Zach has put together an incredible collection over the years of haunted objects. And, I thought I had a lot of them, but, this guy, of course, has just got a lot of the cream of the crop. And he really did it justice. The tours are a guided tour, and as they take you through the museum, there are different areas that are sort of, some of the areas are themed. So that's due to a lot of the major pieces that he has. I'll give you an example, is that he has put Jack Kevorkian's van. Jack Kevorkian was known as Dr. Death. And there's an area in the museum where you go in, and it's Kevorkian's office, and then you go through that and into another room, and there's this van sitting there. And of course, that's where a lot of people ended their lives. And that, to me, I was a little bit surprised. That was actually one of the heavier areas. Walking in there, it's real thick. I mean, the feeling and the energy of that is, if you're sensitive at all, and even for a lot of people who aren't, I think you'll notice that. But he's really done justice to this thing. A lot of the displays are just so impressive, and I won't give people spoilers, but some of the main items, of course, everybody knows he's got Kevorkian's van. Everybody knows that the Dybbuk box is in there. And the Dybbuk box, of course, is a pretty notorious item that is in a room by itself too. And as you go through the mansion, there are various things where the tour guides will give you a choice whether you want to step into the room with this particular item. So the Dybbuk box is one of those. They give people a choice. They say, tell a little bit about the Dybbuk box, and they say, this is, it's behind this door. If you choose to walk in, the box is enclosed in a case, and it's protected. But you have to choose whether you walk in there. The one that really got a lot of people on the tour I went on, I was there opening day, and the place was packed. And when we went in, they had Peggy the doll, which of course I covered in Haunted Toys. And Peggy the doll is in the museum. She's in her own room, and the tour group I was with, hardly anyone would go in that door to see Peggy. They were all too afraid to look at this doll. Of course, I was at the front of the line to get in, but there was nobody waiting, so it was pretty cool. And the whole thing is an experience, really, from the beginning to the end. And I talked to a lot of people who were coming out of it, and who had been in there, and heard constantly that they'd be back. They wanted to go through it again and re-experience it, because there really is so much to take in that if you have a curiosity and you're fascinated by these things, one trip probably won't be enough for you. There really is. There's so much to see in there. And there's even, when I was there on opening day, there were even a couple of the rooms that aren't even open yet, because they're still adding things to them. So it's going to be a constantly evolving and expanding collection as Zach continues to accumulate items and put more things on display. It really is do not miss if you're in Vegas.
Dave, are there that many haunted items out there? And if so, have you been able to figure out why spirits attach themselves to these inanimate objects?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, Dave. I think you have to realize that there's not any one specific answer as to why an item may be haunted. But when you start looking at all the various reasons that they can be, then it begins to make sense to why there are so many haunted items out there. For instance, there's a lot of personal items, and whether it's a piece of jewelry or a piece of clothing or something, sometimes a piece of furniture, but it might have been present during a very traumatic incident. in fact, I'm sitting right now at a banker's desk from the 1900s that I own that is haunted. And the story is that this banker who was just obsessed with work died at his desk. And so, a lot of these things are just items that get an imprint from the time and the circumstances that they were present for. Then you have items that are much more personal that are a focal point of energy. For instance, a doll is a good example of that. And there are some really good examples of those types of dolls. Robert is probably one of the best examples. A lot of people know the story of Robert. I think I've talked about him on the show before, haven't I?
Yeah, briefly. Go into Robert again.
So Robert the doll is one of the two most well-known haunted dolls, I think, at this point, are Robert the doll and Annabelle. Of course, Annabelle's notorious now because there are movies being made about her. Robert the doll lives in Key West, and I say that he lives there because people really believe that this doll has a consciousness. The story of Robert is that, and I'm going to give you both stories. The original story was that Robert was given to a little boy named Robert Eugene, who got the doll from a maid who had lived in the islands, and she cursed the doll. Okay, she was purportedly a voodoo practitioner or some type of associated tradition, and she cursed this doll. And that once the little boy received the doll, it took on a life of its own. Now, the doll was named by the little boy, and he was named Robert. And this little boy essentially gave his name to the doll because his name was Robert. So he gave the doll the name Robert, and from that time on, the little boy was called Eugene. As the years went by, all of these bizarre things began to happen in the household. Strange things would happen. Dishes would be thrown on the floor and busted, and Eugene would immediately say, Robert did it. People reported hearing the sound of these little footsteps when Eugene was in clear sight, but the doll was upstairs in the room. And this went on, and in fact, what happened was, as Eugene grew older, he moved away, he went to college, he ended up getting married. He eventually came back to Key West, back to the family home with his new wife, and back to the home where Robert was still there, waiting for him. When he moved back into the home as an adult, he gave Robert his own room up in the attic of the house. He gave Robert a little rocking chair to sit on. He gave Robert, all these things, all this furniture his size. And the house became known as being haunted by this doll. Kids from school would make it a point to walk the long way around so they didn't have to cross in front of this house, because they said they could see Robert standing at the window staring down at them. All these creepy stories begin to be associated with this doll. Now, this is a grown man, who has his childhood doll, and he's treating it as a living being. And eventually, when Eugene passed away, the Robert the doll ended up in the hands of a museum, the East Martello Museum. Now, some of the story has been debunked, but actually, for me, I think that it gets even more fascinating, because here's what happened. During research on this doll, the origins were eventually traced down, and it was a very difficult task to do, but they found out that the doll actually came from Europe, and that it had been part of a store display. So that was why it was very unique. And, it was pretty much almost a one of a kind. So it turned out that Eugene's grandfather, I believe it was, actually purchased the doll in Europe and brought it back as a gift for the child. Gave him the doll. Somewhere along the way, Robert gained a sailor's outfit, which is what he's, long worn, and everybody's always been aware of this. He also developed a reputation, once he got in the museum, of being very particular about whether people could take his photograph. The East Martello Museum, where Robert sits in a glass case, receives hundreds of letters from people asking for Robert to forgive them because they came in and they took his picture without permission, or they came in and they made fun of him, insulted him, and so forth. And when they left, they experienced a strange string of bad luck. So the common belief among a lot of people is that Robert has the ability to curse people, and that it's best to treat this doll with respect and essentially treat him, as a real person. So it becomes a pretty fascinating, set of circumstances where you have a doll that this young man instilled a lot of energy in from the time he was a boy all the way into his adulthood. And then, of course, the reputation of the doll, which caused many other people, I think, to add to this collective consciousness almost that Robert is more than just a doll. And, whether this is a strange psychological thing playing out for people or not, it is something that is very real for hundreds of people. You can go to the Martello Museum at any point, and they usually keep a series of the letters on display from people asking for forgiveness, because of the terrible things that happened to them after they insulted Robert. Another curious twist that happened somewhere along the way in the last few years with Robert is that staff at the museum came in one day, and as I stated, Robert is in a glass case. An employee came in, was cleaning the case, and suddenly noticed that in the case with Robert was a little stuffed lion. Now, they were very puzzled by this. No one had access to this sealed case. They determined when they investigated this incident that the stuffed animal had actually come out of another display in a different part of the museum that was also in a case. And this happened mysteriously in the middle of the night. So everybody, even the employees, were too afraid to mess with this. So they've all left Robert alone and let him have his, little stuffed animal in there with him. And that's how you'll find him, in fact, if you are able to visit the museum in Key West.
I have a question about that. Out of all these years that Robert the doll has been in his glass case, and knowing how haunted he is supposed to be, do they not have any cameras on this to figure out how that little lion got there?
They do have cameras all over the museum, but they didn't find any evidence, to my knowledge, of how the lion got in there. So, Robert is, he's pretty much left alone. I mean, this is antique at this point. So, he is taken out for, to be checked on regularly to make sure that he's not deteriorating or anything. They actually moved him recently because of the hurricane that came in. And it's pretty amusing because there's a Facebook page for Robert the doll, and the postings, of course, it's done by the museum, but, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, it's worth going on and looking at the Facebook page for Robert the doll, because Robert makes postings on the Facebook page, and he was not happy about the hurricane coming in, and basically, made a comment that he was cursing the hurricane, for coming in and making him leave his home for the time. So, it's just sort of an interesting addition, and it's another sign of how, this whole idea has grown up around this doll that he has a consciousness to some degree.
Now, is it true that they actually, in the museum, have pictures or notes up for people basically stating, please ask Robert's permission before you take his picture?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
And a lot of people, I would assume, then, are just thinking that that's just a typical museum hoax until they get home and the bad stuff happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, that come in and they, there's a whole segment of people out there that make fun of the paranormal anyway, whether it's ghost or, a haunted doll or whatever it is. So they think it's all, fun and games, and they think it's a big joke, and, they're trying to be, I don't know, trying to come in and be ballsy or whatever and insult Robert and make fun of it. And, you'll see them do things like take rude pictures and things like that. And then a good portion of those people, we really don't know how many of them, but, a good portion of those people, they turn right around and regret what they've done. And, typical things, I talked to a woman. I was down there, it's been quite a few years since I've seen the museum and Robert, but I remember talking to a woman, young woman who was in her early 20s, and she and her boyfriend had come in and they had made fun of Robert, and taken, a picture with a rude gesture or something and this type of thing. So immediately after leaving the museum, they walked outside and they saw their car being towed away. And that was kind of the start of it. So, one or two things you can sort of put down to, well, it's a strange coincidence, maybe, but, it gets rather odd when you hear case after case of people reporting a whole series of things. And, this particular woman told me that it started with their car being towed. They had to pay a bunch of money to get the car out. When they got the car out, they headed home. Home was, I think it was Georgia or South Carolina or something. They broke down on the way. They ended up in this huge fight. The couple split. It was this whole series of bizarre things that kind of came out of nowhere for her. At least that's, that was how she stated it. And by the time she got home and went back to stay with her parents because she had split with her boyfriend, and got over some kind of terrible flu that she had caught on the trip, she finally concluded that this was due to the rudeness that she had shown to Robert. So she promptly wrote a letter and asked for Robert's forgiveness and sent it to the museum, and decided later that wasn't quite good enough. So she actually went back down to the museum and apologized, stood in front of this doll and apologized. And it's kind of funny to, in some ways, to sit and listen to one of these stories from the outside. But when you're sitting there and talking with the person and they're clearly still distraught over the situation and, being very honest with what their experience was, that's what she was doing. She said this was very real. This is what happened to me, and this is what I experienced. And once I went back to the museum and apologized to Robert, I walked back out of the museum feeling like a weight had lifted, and I didn't have any more bad luck then. So, this gets into areas of the paranormal that we really don't. This is a real kind of a twisted up ball of string that's knotted together. How do we start to dissect this? Is this object, this doll, genuinely carrying some kind of energy that curses people? Is it a psychological, something that's playing out with people who have this experience? Or is it something else? I don't, I'm very fascinated by it. I don't have the answers. I don't think anybody has the answers because, as I said, there's just so many cases of people talking about this doll personally. And it becomes a pretty fascinating area of study.
Well, we have Mandy the Haunted Doll. That is...
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and Mandy is in a small museum about 2.5 hours north of me. And I have actually visited her and photographed her. And a good friend of mine, Glenn Ferguson, who's been on this show a number of times, he actually was possessed by the doll. And
oh, really?
Yes, two of his crew, Troy and Mike, actually found Glenn kneeling in front of the doll case, staring at this Mandy the doll for about 5-6 minutes. They could not snap him out. He wasn't blinking, nothing. And then all of a sudden when he came through, he was lethargic and then just stood up and ran outside and vomited his guts out. She got him. But Mandy is, it's weird because when you look at this doll, I mean, ordinarily the way she is cracked, because she's almost like a porcelain, you would think that, you know, back in the day, something that is that cracked along the face, you know, mom or dad or grandma or grandpa would have thrown it out. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You know, I mean, because normally people just don't keep broken toys. Yet,
yeah,
Mandy survived.
I wrote about Mandy and haunted toys too. And there's, you know, I'd love to hear this guy's personal experience, obviously, but you know, it's another one of those dolls. A lot of these haunted dolls show up, and the origins are very vague. You know, that's the case with Peggy. Peggy, the doll that came from the UK, is now in Zach's museum. Peggy is the doll that had the reputation for causing heart attacks when people watched videos of her online. And, you know, there's very little information about the origins of this doll. There is of course, the Brits are a lot more open. A lot of the researchers there are a lot more open to using psychics and getting information, you know, from them. And there was a woman who claimed that Peggy, you know, had this darker energy, and then it would cause all these problems, you know, for people because it was such a heavy energy. But, you know, the researcher who owned Peggy at the time was doing different experiments to try to document activity, and she posted videos of Peggy. And suddenly people were reporting that they were watching the video and having all of these physical ailments and complications from looking at the doll. And, you know, they'll tell you at the museum she's, you know, she's in a separate room, and as I stated earlier, you have to choose whether you want to go in and look at Peggy. But they'll say a similar thing. They'll say, you know, it's not advisable to look Peggy in the eye. You know, it's best to go in and say hello to her and be, you know, have a pleasant attitude or be nice, you know, not be insulting or anything, because this doll has been known to cause a lot of physical complications for people.
Why does it always seem to be a doll? Whether it's Robert, Mandy, Peggy, Annabelle, is it because of the history of dolls, David, where we looked at dolls and apparently beforehand they were created to hold the spirits of children or loved ones who had passed on?
Well, sure. I mean, you've got a lot of ritual use of dolls. You know, everybody knows about the voodoo doll. And, of course, some of that is Hollywood hype, but there is a real side to that, too. And there's the idea that in what's called sympathetic magic, a doll can be made to represent a person. And hey, you know, you look at a doll, it represents a person, you know, it has all the features. And in sympathetic magic, a lot of times practitioners who are trying to do negative things will make a doll or do something to a doll to make it represent the person that they want to get even with, you know, and they'll maybe put personal items on. If they can get an article of the person's clothing or some of their hair or something, they'll put it on this doll, and they'll do things ritually to the doll, cause harm to it. The idea being that in turn it causes harm to the person it represents. So, you know, if you take that aspect of dolls, and then you take the other aspect that they do represent a human, you know, they're a human form. So, you know, some people I think have a hard time subconsciously relating to that and being completely comfortable with it. There's a lot of people who are very uneasy around dolls. And of course, they're given to children all the time. And what happens, the children, talk to them like they're another person. They begin to relate to them. And of course, there's a positive side to that. And then there's a maybe more negative side to it, where the children, begin to humanize the doll so much. But we have to take into account the energetic aspect, which really, the modern world is just starting to understand the human energy field and how, what we think and what we project alters things around us. Quantum science is getting into that some. But you go back to really older traditions and they talk about, again, having a doll or having a representative object and you're projecting energy into it, ultimately, really, what are you doing? You're instilling something into that object, that doll. Maybe it's a part of yourself, maybe it's something else. But you put enough of that energy in there and it's going to cause a reaction, or it's going to respond or react to you to some degree.
We only got about 5.5 minutes here before we got to go to our first break. Changing topics a little bit, Ron is asking, David, do you believe ships like the Queen Mary and hotels such as the Stanley hold spirits or entities, and why?
Oh, sure. A lot of historic locations are haunted. Man, the Queen Mary's a whole topic we could talk about because, it has, the Queen Mary, of course, saw so much. It was used during war, a lot of deaths, of course, on the ship. But it's also one of those places that has such a reputation for being haunted. This goes right back into energy again, and maybe we can talk about this some on the other side of the break. I think that there are spirits in the Queen Mary that either are not what they seem to be, or they're created ghost, and that gets into the topic of tulpas. If you want to go into that someday on the other side, that's kind of a biggie, but I'd be glad to talk about it.
Do you find that it is just spirits hanging around, or do you think a lot of them are vagabonds still wandering this earth, maybe along their last path that they know?
Yeah, it's all of the above. A lot of people want a singular answer for ghosts, and I don't believe that there is one. A very Christian person wants to think that everything is demonic. Someone else might want to think that everything is just a lost spirit, who doesn't know that they're dead. But really, there's not one singular answer. We have to be open to a variety of things explaining these situations because, every haunting has its own unique aspects.
The reason why I ask is, on my tour, we have this one ghost that came through, and we started talking about the old Gold Rush Trail. And all of a sudden, all of our meters started lighting up the minute we started asking him questions. We figured out he was American. We figured out that he had crossed the border in Washington State into British Columbia and took the old paddle wheeler up to Yale, British Columbia, where they actually, you may have heard the story of Jacko, the mini Sasquatch. The ape boy, yeah, absolutely. That happened in that area, and then caught a stagecoach up to our area where he went gold prospecting. And the funny part about it was we had never contacted this guy before. We couldn't get a name from him. But where it turned hilarious was one of the gentlemen who was with us, his name is Dan, he's one of the curators at the museum. He says, "Can you show us where your gold is?" And all of a sudden, all of our meters went silent. Everything. He just disappeared for about 4 or 5 minutes before we got him back saying, no, we don't want your gold. Have you ever had a situation like that happen?
That's funny. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure have. And that, there you're getting into intelligent hauntings, and it likely is some spirit connected to the location. I mean, we didn't even talk about the whole idea of residual energy, what is basically a recording on a location, something that just plays itself out. And it's just an impression, whether it's left, in the building itself or the foundation. You know, there's the old stone tape theory, or any number of things. But you're talking about an intelligent haunting as something that is interacting to a certain degree. And yeah, you have to be careful. You know, some things will shut those spirits right down, just like a normal everyday person. You know, some things they're not willing to talk about.
Do you think it's because some of them don't know they're dead?
I think sometimes that's the case. I don't think that is necessarily, again, that's something that, everybody wants to say, all of these spirits, they just don't know that they're dead. But I don't always think that's the case, no.
Well, we're going to find out more in hour number 2 of the hauntings. The other information you have to share, because the one thing I love about you being on the air, Dave, we never know where it's going to go. We just start talking.
That's right.
We just start talking, and wherever the subject goes, that's where it goes. And believe it or not, it's one of those things where, we've had Dave on the air so much now with us, I don't even script anything. It's just figure, let's just start the conversation and run with it. And it always seems to work, doesn't it, Dave?
Yeah, it's very cool.
Right on. You got some new books coming out here soon?
I do, man. Yeah.
All right.
We can talk about it on the other side.
Absolutely. Dave's books can be found anywhere online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any major bookstore, because he is that damn good. David Weatherly is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio. We're going to get more into hauntings. Since it is the year of All Hallows Eve, that time, 1 week tonight, the kids will be trick-or-treating, so make sure if you're out on Halloween night, you are watching out for the little rascals and ghouls and goblins, making sure you're not stealing their candy or anything like that. That's my job for my kid. I'm going to steal all of his. Well, some of it. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio, hour number 2 with David Weatherly, coming up right after this.
365 days a year, we're in the field, investigating UFO sightings, talking to alien abductees, and visiting secret military locations like Area 51. We're UFO Seekers, official partner of Spaced Out Radio. Follow our daily search for the truth at ufoseekers.com or like us on social media. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, we're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spaceoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spaceoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Want to learn more about aliens, cover-ups, conspiracies, cryptids, and the paranormal? All you have to do is tune in S4 as we take over Spaced Out Radio Night, starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday night, right after Spaced Out Saturdays. Hi there, this is Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. Join me, Corey Ruiz, and friends as we discuss the hot topics of the night. It's fun, entertaining, and as dark as the night. Find us at spacedoutradio.com.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. To get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut and join us, eh?
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
Want a place to share your experiences without feeling judged? We have the place for you. If you've experienced sightings or contact with ETs, ghosts, cryptids, or UFOs, and you'd like someone to confidentially look into the matter, just fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Our goal is to help you get the answers you need to the experiences you've had with our professional team of researchers. Your information stays 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines report. Fill out your experience today only at spacedoutradio.com.
Psychic Sundays, spiritual communication, ET contact, Sasquatch in your backyard. We will have it all on Cosmic Passport with me, Elizabeth Anglin. Each Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, at spacedoutradio.com, I will take you on a journey of enlightenment. The goal is learning from the soul on out. We'd love it if you joined our experience, Cosmic Passport, heard Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest, from Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
Welcome to Spaced Out Saturdays with me, Dave Cruz from Beyond the Strange. Our weekly feature on spacedoutradio.com will take you around the world discussing everything from the paranormal to the latest conspiracies from the top guests in their fields. We won't leave any story uncovered. Spaced Out Saturdays at spacedoutradio.com starting 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, back from illness, Ian Holt will be joining us. We'll be talking all things paranormal, see where it goes, see what Ian's been up to. Battled a really bad case of pneumonia. He had been down for the count for a few weeks, but he is back 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, at over 160 countries around the world. Great to have you with us as well. We're also live on KTLK, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Valetudinarian. Valetudinarian is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio like Canadian Joe just moments ago. If you want to connect live with me during the show, you can also join us on Facebook. Give our page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. You can also join us for live chat in the SOR Space Travelers group. We're on Instagram, Dave Scott SOR. You can listen to us on iHeartRadio in the United States, TalkStream Live. Tune us in on TuneIn, download and subscribe to our shows on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. You can rock out to some Bumblefoot. You can read The Encounter online, shop at our Spaced Out Radio store, or watch some great video footage from Contact TV or Tim Doyle's UFO Seekers. Everything at spacedoutradio.com. David Weatherly joins us every 2 months to talk about everything cryptid and abnormal in this world. You can find all of his books either on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or any major bookstore. David, welcome back.
Hey, man. Good to be on tonight.
You were talking right before the break about the energy of ghosts, and we were talking in conjunction with the ghost of the Queen Mary. What do you think is with the energy of the ghost that keeps them around?
Well, as we discussed, in the first hour, I think there are a lot of different things. Sometimes you have a residual haunting that is just it's basically a recording. There's an old theory called the stone tape theory that certain events, emotional events, traumatic incidents can be impressed on an environment, whether that's in the building itself. The stone tape theory is so named because of the idea that limestone in particular can hold energy, and that when conditions are right, this recording replays itself. So this would account for some hauntings that are sort of the classical, ghostly manifestation of the woman in white who goes down a hallway and, turns in and walks through the wall, because a doorway used to exist there. So this is a replay of some kind of event, something that was impressed on the environment somehow. And as I stated, when conditions are right, maybe that means the environmental conditions, maybe it's the weather, maybe it's the combination of people who are there, but something triggers this replay and causes it to display itself again. Sometimes it's on the anniversary of an event. There are legends, you find them a lot, particularly in Europe, of hauntings where, every, whatever date, every May 14th, this incident happens at this castle. And, these are residual hauntings more than likely, an advanced type of recording that we just don't completely understand yet. Then you have intelligent hauntings where the spirits seem to interact to some degree, like you experienced, with the incident you were telling me about, where the spirit appeared to be that of a prospector, someone who had, stored away some gold somewhere, and maybe he doesn't completely understand what's happened to him. He's still existing somehow on some level, and is able to interact, to a certain degree, with people that come in and attempt to contact him. And, then I think you have another class of spirits that maybe we just don't completely understand what they are. Some people would classify them as demonic. Some people would say, they're just otherworldly spirits or lost spirits or whatever. But, you get these entities that come in and seem to be deceptive or want to cause trouble and harass people. And, then you sort of have a whole another category of those, the ones that manifest as outright evil. And a lot of people jump to the conclusion that those are demons. I'm always very cautious about using that term because, you have to remember that I'm pausing because I don't want to use any foul language here. You have to recall that if a person is a real jerk in life and is a nasty human being, then, why do you think they're going to be any different if they're stuck on the other side and still interacting to some degree? So, I think that some of the things that people believe are demons are actually just nasty humans who want people to believe that they're, some kind of powerful otherworldly entity.
Couple questions. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Dave.
go ahead.
No, please finish up.
Oh, I was just going to say, so again, not any one singular explanation, I don't believe, for ghosts.
Couple questions from our audience, if you don't mind. This one coming from the Revolution Radio chat room from Stardust Man. He is asking, was Chucky from the movies based on Robert the Doll?
Absolutely. I forgot to throw that in there earlier, but Robert the Doll was indeed the inspiration for the Chucky movies.
Boy, they took Chucky to the extreme, though.
Yeah, they did. Well, people were you have to understand, a lot of people were very frightened of Robert. And, there was this activity around him that was, purportedly was very physical to a certain degree, things being broken. Numerous people reported hearing him running around or what sounded like a little, child running around upstairs when no one was up there but Robert the Doll. And of course, the stories of people going by the home and seeing Robert standing at the window peering out at them. So, the creep factor was definitely there. And somewhere along the way, someone was inspired to write these Chucky movies. And the story is that, they drew some inspiration from the idea of Robert the Doll.
It's amazing how Hollywood can exploit even the smallest of things.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Do you think, and speaking of Hollywood, we have seen so many different Hollywood movies over the years with them exploiting what really happened. A couple of instances I can, call off the top of my head here, Dave, are, the Ouija board movies, okay, where everything is demonic coming out of there, and even going as far as Fire in the Sky with Travis Walton, where, he said himself that the aliens really weren't there to harm him. And in fact, he thinks they actually saved his life after accidentally beaming him. So let's get into some of this folklore here, especially with the Ouija board. A week tonight, Karen Dahlman is going to be here for the second Halloween in a row doing a live Ouija board session. Do you believe that the Ouija board is as evil as many people believe?
The short answer is no, I don't. And, I know a lot of other investigators, people I respect well, who disagree with me on that. But, again, I have to go with the facts, and I have to look into the history of things. That's kind of what I do. So if we go back to the origins of the board and, realize that this evil version of the board, it really came along primarily, as you said, Dave, with the movies. Particularly, there was a movie called Witchboard. That was a big one back in the 80s, and that seemed to launch a whole series of these films that, started cranking out, B-grade movies about Ouija boards, bringing through demons out of portals and so forth. And, of course, go a little bit further back, and you've got The Exorcist, in which, this was being used to communicate with something that turned out to be demonic. But really, if you go further back into the history of the Ouija board, it was indeed designed as a game. There's a famous, I think it's a Norman Rockwell painting of, people using a Ouija board. And you have to realize that back in the day, social morals were different. So, it wasn't that kosher for men and women to be too intimate or close in public. And, that the introduction of the Ouija board and the way it was originally used, the early instructions said that the best way to use the board was for a man and woman to sit knee to knee and balance the board on their knees. And then they both, were to touch the planchette and begin to ask these questions. So, you're setting up a game that allows for a close level of intimacy for people who couldn't get away with that in public back then. And, it kind of caught on, and it's gone through different phases of popularity, of course. But along the way, these Hollywood movies have created this perception that, the Ouija board is a very tool of the devil. And I think there's a couple of different sides to this. One is that we've got all the Hollywood hype and everything that overblows what happens with the use of this board. But one thing that I tell people as a note of caution about the board is that the board is just like any other tool to access psychic abilities. It's just like tarot cards, or really it's just like, EVPs or ghost boxes or anything else. It's a tool to communicate. The issue comes in when the board is often used by adolescents and very common for teenagers, going through puberty, kids going through puberty to use this board. And what do? They sit down with this board and they throw open an invitation. Anything that's here, please come and communicate. Anyone who's here, please come and communicate. That's an invitation to literally anything, to come in and have access to the people who are there gathered around. And, there are no parameters set, and there's no officially closing down this avenue of communication. So the potential is there that any kind of negative entity has had the door open for them, and they can, come in and stay as long as they please. And the analogy as I use is that, if you lived in a bad neighborhood, you wouldn't leave your door, standing open, with a sign that says, please come in. You wouldn't live in any neighborhood, I don't think, in this day and age, and do that. Throw a big sign out that says, please come in. That literally means you can get anybody. And in physical terms, we wouldn't want to do that. So why would we do that in terms of communicating with the spirit world?
And I look at it almost similarly, because when I look at people who use crystals, people who use tea leaves, dowsing rods, pendulums, even ghost hunting equipment or psychics, they're doing the exact same thing as they are doing with the Ouija board.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And people will argue that. The one singular difference that comes in, for instance, between a Ouija board and, let's say, typically an electronic device like a ghost box or a recorder, is that the Ouija board very much engages the human energy field in a different way, I believe. It's sort of forcing the person, whether consciously or subconsciously, to tap into something a little bit deeper in, whether it's their higher consciousness or whether it's opening themselves up in a different way for communication. Electronic devices sort of set a different barrier there, but I would argue that the premise is certainly the same, and that the invitation is being put out there, and I think you just have to be very cautious with it.
Do you find that people who use them are more trained than others? Because there is a lot of people out there, including Karen Dahlman, Robert Murch, and the sorts, who believe that there is a right way and a wrong way to use this board.
Oh, I think the bulk of the people who use Ouija boards are not trained. I think that, again, you get a lot of teenagers and young children and even adults who see them. They think it's really cool. This whole idea that there is a darker or demonic side to these boards has actually made the audience larger. because people are very attracted to that type of thing. So, no, I think that most of the people who attempt to use the board are not trained and really don't know what they're doing, and they just grab these things and they run with it. And of course, having traveling so much and doing so many different conferences and things, I hear so many stories about Ouija boards. And of course, the most famous one is, I can't tell you how many times, Dave, I've had somebody come up and they start telling me a story about a Ouija board and how it couldn't be burned, it couldn't be broken, all these things. It couldn't be disposed of. And my first question to every one of these people is, where is it? Give it to me. I want to see it. And I've yet, 40 years of doing this stuff, I've yet to have somebody bring me a board and say, here it is. It can't be burned. It can't be broken. It can't be disposed of. I just, I haven't encountered that. So the stories are great, but there is an air of urban legend about some aspects of these things. And, at the same time, we default back to, of course, the films, because those versions of those stories, they really became popular after the, powerful demonic boards, showed up in the films. And, I always, when I talk to people who are devout Christians and so forth about these boards, one of the things I ask them is, why are you giving a piece of wood this much power? Do you really believe this object has this much power? Because that's really what they're doing. And, you could argue to some degree that that's rather sacrilegious, because you're saying, okay, this board that's manufactured in a plant, it is what it's more powerful than your faith. It's more powerful than your religion. And that's something that I think a lot of people need to question, who give so much credence to these boards being so evil and so demonic.
So do you have, in all of your research, have any great Ouija board stories that you think are true, considering it's Halloween?
I've had a few stories of people having experiences with using a Ouija board that, it doesn't necessarily, it's not one of the typical stories, and I'm trying to remember the details of one at the moment that involved a location that was haunted, and it's been a long, you're going to have to forgive me for a moment, it's been a long time since I looked at this case. This is from probably the late 90s. I had a case that was a home that was having some poltergeist-like activity, and it ended up being centered around a young girl who, along with some of her classmates, had gotten interested in witchcraft and, using a Ouija board and tarot cards and things like this. And basically they were doing it as their own form of a rebellion. At the time, they were looking for something that would sort of bind them together and make them feel, like they belonged to something, because this was a group that was kind of the outsiders. And they ended up trying to perform some witchcraft, of course, that they were learning in books and so forth. And they ended up with a Ouija board and were attempting to contact something in the home they lived in. It had been an older home that was built in, I want to say the 1940s, I believe is what it was. And the short version of the story was that they did several little parties that the teenagers did and tried to communicate with their board, and believed that they were getting through to something because they were having candles go out in the room when they were doing the ritual, and they were hearing what they thought were sounds and so forth. But they got a little bit bored because nothing overly dramatic was happening, so they put the Ouija board up. And a couple of weeks later, this teenage girl who was home alone at the time went down into the basement because they had the washer and dryer down there. And she had a very terrifying encounter with this, as she called it, I believe at the time, a thing that appeared human but looked like it had crawled out of a swamp or something. It was, she said, it was covered in what she thought was muck and weeds and so forth. And this thing was suddenly manifested in the basement and was very close to her. She, of course, was terrified and ran up the stairs and out of the house and over to a neighbor's or something. Didn't tell her mother right away what had happened because once she calmed down, she had several hours before she could talk to her parents about it. Once she calmed down about it, she began to think maybe she had imagined it or something else was going on. So these incidents began to increase. And eventually what happened was they started having poltergeist-like activity in the basement of their home. Now, the basement is not where these kids were conducting their Ouija board sessions. They were doing it up in the girls' bedroom. So it was kind of interesting. It was one of those cases that, it took me a little while to drag out all the details because when I go to a situation like that, I do want to know. There's a whole litany of things I want to know from the people, including practical things like, medications and, is anyone drinking? Is anyone using drugs? All these types of things. But one of the things, of course, is the question as to whether or not anyone is dabbling in any type of magic or ceremony or ritual. And, eventually this girl did confess to me. She didn't right away, but she eventually did confess to me that her and her friends were doing these rituals and trying to summon something. And what we eventually determined, the house was built on land that had originally been a swamp. And there was a murder that purportedly had taken place somewhere in the area. And it seemed to be a case where their attempts at contacting anything and anyone that would communicate drew the attention of the spirit, this man who had been murdered and his body had never been found. And because he had been called forth by these kids, he was trying to communicate, and when they didn't recognize that and they were terrified of him, he tried to manifest and, grew angry and started doing things to show that he was there and that he was upset. So, not a terrifying case, but certainly a pretty fascinating one at the very least, because it was a case where, initially the assumption was that they had drawn something really negative forward, but again, looking into closer details of the case, we find that there's an explanation for something that appears to be very frightening and demonic. It wasn't some shambling swamp monster. It was actually a manifestation of a man whose body had been lost in the swamp.
That's eerie. That is eerie. Couple questions from our audience for you, Dave. Ron is asking, David, what is your opinion of exorcisms? Are they real? And if so, why do you think Catholics think they are the only ones empowered to remove malevolent entities?
Wow. Okay. Well, first of all, they're not the only ones who believe they're empowered to do that, because there are some shamanic cultures that talk about entities being able to take possession of a human form and that there are ways to expel them. I can understand why you believe that, because, of course, Catholics promote the idea that they're the only ones, that they are the authority when it comes to exorcisms. Of course, the Catholic Church looks at all such manifestations as being demonic and linked to Satan. So we really get into, I guess, a religious argument if we have to try to determine, okay, well, why do they think only they can do it? From their perspective, I understand why they think only they can do it, because they believe that the church is the ultimate authority, that a person who is possessed by a demon, means that it is a demon in terms of a Christian demonic manifestation, and that only the Catholic Church has the power to do that. I think we could probably talk for 3 hours easily just about exorcisms and all the different aspects of the reality of that. I think possession is certainly a reality. And, it's a tough thing to start to talk about that because you have to account for different people's theology and belief. One of the flaws I think that comes along is that a lot of people try to apply the Catholic belief system to non-Catholics. And you're trying to reconcile different cultures that approach a phenomenon in a very different way. Something that would appear to be a demonic possession to a Catholic would appear to be something very different, for instance, to a Muslim, because in their theology, they deal with the jinn. So I think there's certainly a universal concept that goes through a lot of different cultures of a negative entity being able, in the right circumstances, to take possession of a human body. And there are processes to expel those entities. And I hope that answers the question, because it is a great one, but I'm trying to keep it short and not expound all night on exorcism.
Let's get to Adam's question in the SOR Space Travelers Club. And I don't even know why I'm going to ask this, Dave, because I know he's just doing it to get under my skin. And he's wondering, have you ever had any freaky cases involving gnomes? I hate those damn things, Dave. There isn't much that scares me, but those damn gnomes, they're just nothing but trouble.
That's funny. I think we talked about this a little before. I'm really fascinated by all these accounts of various little people, whether you call them gnomes or, of course, elves in Iceland and leprechauns and so forth. There's a lot of different terms for them. But yeah, I've actually got a lot of accounts of these, of manifestations of these beings. And what a lot of people don't realize is that, you say gnome, people think Europe, they think Scandinavia, whatever. But really, legends of little people are pretty universal. And even in the United States, a lot of native cultures talk about, they have legends of these little people. Now, I talked to a guy a few years ago, Dave, who was a law enforcement officer. You can't get much more credible than that in terms of, talking about an account like this, because they got a lot to lose when they're coming out and talking about this, even in confidence. But this guy was in northern Utah. He was on patrol. He drove up into an area. It's an area where there have been some odd reports. He drove up this road, and in front of him, there is elevated area that is all rock formation, but there is a sort of platform, a large rock that is completely flat. He got out of his cruiser because of what he was seeing. He got out of his cruiser to take a closer look at a group of gnomes that were dancing in a circle on this rock. When he stepped out of his cruiser, he heard music coming from the area, and he was just transfixed, looking at these, what he said were gnomes. This group of gnomes dancing around in a circle, who continued for, almost a minute until they suddenly stopped and looked straight at him. When they stopped dancing, the music stopped, they looked straight at him, and then they vanished. This guy has never gotten over this case. He's still a law enforcement officer. There's no rational explanation for what he experienced. He went up to the area. The rock is very flat, and it's sort of beaten down. And he said it's one of those areas that gives you the impression that a lot of people have stood over the area or, been on this rock over time because of the wearing on the rock. But he swears that he saw a group of gnomes.
Yeah, old Davy would be running the opposite way very, very fast. And, I'm being absolutely pounded by gnome pictures now on Twitter and in the SOR Space Travelers group because my audience loves to torture me with these damn things, and they're just scary little creatures. Scary little creatures.
I've got accounts from all over this country. I've got an account from Pennsylvania, from a large farm there that the people who live there, they swear there are gnomes on the land. And these gnomes are very, they're sort of trickster-like, and when people come up there that they don't like, there is inevitably trouble. The one guy came to visit, and he came to visit on one occasion, and he heard the stories about the gnomes, and he was making some nasty cracks about them, and was, kind of being a jerk, and he left. He came back a few days later, and this time he came back, he pulled in, he visited for a brief time. When he went to leave, he got down the lane, which is a fairly long lane, out onto the road, and the two back tires of his car fell off. All the lug nuts were gone. So these gnomes had stolen the lug nuts, is what everyone on the property believes. And this guy never went back up there again because there's just no, it's a farm in the middle of nowhere. And, it's not like some troublesome kids came up and were trying to steal tires or anything. So it was a weird case, but there's a lot of accounts from this property that are similar to that.
James Gilliland at the ESETI Ranch says he has gnomes on his property as well that sit near the river that goes through. And, I think that's the reason why I've never accepted his invitation to go on down there and watch for UFOs, because with my luck, I'll end up getting chased by the damn gnomes.
Hey, if they don't like you that much, Dave, we'll go to the ranch at the same time because I want to document the gnomes chasing you.
My God, man, you're evil as well. You're evil as well. But let's move on here because I hate those damn things. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate that, listener Adam. You're number one on the list right now. You know that. Anyways, BTO has a question here. David, do you know anything, or have you ever researched any information about the Jersey Devil? And do you believe there are any cryptids in the New York City area?
The Jersey Devil is, of course, a pretty fascinating case. There's a lot of folklore that's grown up around it over the years. The Pine Barrens, where the Jersey Devil manifested, of course, is a very eerie place. I've been in there years ago, and a lot of strange things in the Pine Barrens. I think this is one of those cases that has some kind of grain of truth to it, and of course, melded along the way with folklore, and became something much more grandiose to an extent. But, there's definitely a few aspects of the Jersey Devil case that are a bit unexplainable. And the Pine Barrens themselves, when you go in there, you think, man, this is certainly an area that's primed for some kind of weird manifestations to happen. And, of course, parts of it are reputedly haunted, and, there've been other strange sightings. One of the things about the Jersey Devil is, though, there's not a lot of sightings beyond the initial outbreak of them. So we kind of have to wonder what exactly this thing was that people were experiencing and seeing. But New York City, over the years, there's a few cases that get reported here and there. Of course, there's the legends of the giant alligators in the sewers and giant rats and things like that. There's been a few winged creatures that have been spotted in New York briefly over the years, but most of the things tend to be very much just one-off sightings and encounters. There's nothing that I can recall very recently that's been reported in New York City. But of course, Chicago's having a whole rash of Mothman type manifestations this year.
Yes, and we've been up to date with that with Butch Witkowski from UF4 Cop, who's been following that story along with Lon Strickler. When it comes to New York City, though, that legend of the crocodiles in the New York City sewer system, it seems to have died down over the last number of years. Do you think that is just myth, or do you think that it was probably true at one point where people who maybe had exotic pets who moved to downtown New York City or Manhattan, just let the creatures go into the sewer system for their own safety because they couldn't have them in their condo or anything like that?
Oh yeah, I think it's something that has happened on occasion. And in fact, there was a weird story. I've actually got the news clipping somewhere. It's from a lot of years ago. There was a case this was in New York City. The cops went to an apartment. They ended up calling social services because the family living in this apartment, you're going to love this one, Dave, they had pet alligators. They had very large pet alligators, and the alligators slept with the family. And, they were keeping these gators. In fact, they had put their mattresses directly on the floor to make it easier for the gators to get up and sleep on the mattresses. And, this is one of those things that you hear this and you think, what? What were these people thinking? But it was an actual incident that was reported, that the police reported, and it ended up in the newspaper. And social services was called because this family had kids. And, it's a big, happy family, husband and wife and some kids and some alligators. And it makes you wonder what goes through people's minds sometimes. But it's kind of like those cases where you see, people that are keeping giant boa constrictors and, letting the boa constrictors, of course, wander the house at will. It's just, some people think that's okay, and it's a recipe for disaster. It really is. I think that there's always within cryptozoology an aspect of exotic animals, animals that are exotic to the region being kept as pets, and then the people decide, oh, this is too much, this is, it's too dangerous, or it's too big, or, I can't take care of it, and they release it into the wild. And we've seen that all over the country through the years. Florida has a huge problem with invasive species right now, and a good portion of it is due to so-called exotic pet owners. People buying these anacondas and green mambas and all these exotic snakes, and then not being able to handle them, or the animal getting loose or whatever, and of course going down and thriving in the Everglades, but damaging the native species.
Well, they're always cute when they're small, right?
If you like snakes, I guess
not
so,
me.
Yeah. Or
not me.
Whatever the case is.
Not a snake guy. Not a snake guy. I remember when I was in broadcasting school, I did this story on this reptile rescue farm, and you're always looking for the power scene where you do your stand-up in the middle of the footage, and the lady actually let me into an albino python cage, and she came in with me, and we were doing the interview with this albino python. Well, we were in there probably a few minutes too long because this thing was hissing, and just as we got out, it snapped at us.
Wow.
Yeah. That it was probably a 12 to 15 foot snake, and that's just a little too big and a little too close for comfort.
Right.
But some people just feel the need that they have to be in that danger. Not me.
Yeah, that's
Not
right.
me. Let's get an update, because I know a couple of people have asked this. Is there anything new in cases with black-eyed children?
There hasn't been a whole lot. The cases continue to surface, and of course, we're constantly hearing very, very similar cases. These kids showing up at people's doors and trying to get in and so forth. I haven't received anything personally of great significance over the summer on that. other than, like I said, kind of a lot of run-of-the-mill cases. And I'm not trying to make that sound trivial or anything. It's just that, at a certain point, you shake your head and go, wow, these things are it just kind of keeps going, and small variations. But, it's like looking at case after case of somebody seeing lights that appear to be UFOs in the sky. Okay, well, this happened on this date, this on this date, this location. But they just repeat over and over and over again. And that's been the case with the black-eyed children. One of the things that I continue to be fascinated by on that topic is that there's a lot of other people doing work in the field that are pursuing these things that continue to dig up older cases that well predate, the internet or television or anything else. And that to me is probably the most fascinating aspect of the black-eyed children stuff, because so many people still believe that this is a modern phenomenon, that it only started in the 90s, but really it doesn't take much looking to realize that no, whatever this manifestation is, it's been here for a very long time. It certainly has kicked up to a large degree, the number of cases and the amount of reports and so forth. But there are some back there in the past. I'm actually releasing this year, and I think we talked about this before, I'm releasing a revised edition of the Black-Eyed Children book. I've been on the road so much I haven't finished wrapping it up, but it should, knock on wood, it should be out before the end of the year. And there's a little bit of new material in there, but it's completely revised. It has a beautiful new cover by Sam Sharon, the artist who did my Wood Knot series and the Strange Intruders book.
Sam Sheeran, also a good friend of Shannon Legro, who is very much into the cryptid world with Into the Fray Radio. Very talented lady as well, and a good friend of this show. Milo is asking, David, are there any black-eyed kids reported in certain areas more often than others?
Not so much at this point. There was, when I initially did the research, which is quite a few years ago now, there were some clusters that I found that made it appear that, maybe it was a regional thing, because there were a lot in Texas, there were a lot in Ohio. Florida, I think, was a hot point. So a few other regions, but, over the years, the cases have just surfaced more and more, and from all over the world, really. So I've got cases, from Europe, from Asia, from, Canada, from just points all over the world. And it doesn't seem like there are any specific concentrated areas. I've had a lot of reports earlier this year from the Southwest, particularly some of the native reservations, that, some of the accounts were older, but of course, various tribes are very hesitant about reporting some things. And, I've been blessed over the years to make some inroads with native people, and we'll get reports sometime. And I got a call, it was actually a year ago, I got a call from a friend of mine who lives around Four Corners, is Native American, and told me about a whole rash of sightings unfolding on the Navajo reservation, and that there were reportedly a whole group of these kids, these black-eyed children. And it's fascinating to look at the different cultural perceptions of these things. But, everyone hands down pretty much thinks these things are evil and some kind of a very dark manifestation. The Native Americans are no different. They think that they're some kind of very dark manifestation that's occurring. And of course, their view is that these things are manifesting more heavily now because the world is so out of balance.
Let's get to BTO's question here. He is asking, David, are there any new cryptids that people are talking about these days, besides the ones we already know?
New cryptids. The thing that has caught everyone's attention, not necessarily a new cryptid, but the thing that has really drawn a lot of attention in the past couple of years is the Dogman. And this goes back, of course, a bit further, of course, Linda Godfrey, wrote her incredibly good book on the Beast of Bray Road, and we sort of get into werewolf-like legends, but it seems like in the last several years, the last couple of years in particular, there have just been constant reports of what people are describing as a bipedal, canid humanoid that's very aggressive and is, being reported all across this country. And, you see these outbreaks of these sightings. There was a whole rash of them in Pennsylvania. There were a number in the Carolinas and Virginia a while back. It's, I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. It's pretty fascinating, and I think that to a certain degree, some of them are probably experiencing a Sasquatch-like creature, and are just perceiving it as something a little bit different. But there's so many cases of these dogmen at this point, Dave, of these reports, that some of us are kind of scratching our heads saying, why such a serious uptick in these accounts? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for it, but it's pretty compelling.
Do you think it's just man trying to put their own statement on something, or do you believe this creature actually exists?
My personal belief, do you mean the Dogman, or you mean cryptids in general?
Dogman right now, but cryptids in general, because, some of them get a little bit ridiculous, okay? There's talk of Ant-Man, Goat-Man, Frog-Man, there's so many different brands of this cryptid man that it's hard to keep up sometimes.
Yeah, it is. It is. Again, I don't think there's one singular answer. Now, I personally believe that some of these strange creatures do physically exist. A Sasquatch, of course, is probably the easiest one to argue for that, because there are just so many documented sightings over the years. There's evidence in terms of footprints, and there's just a whole range of things that we can examine when it comes to Sasquatch in general. Then you have these weird one-off cases, the sheep squatch, or the bat squatch, all these strange versions. And I think a lot of these cases are people seeing that unidentified creature that we call Sasquatch, and just having an unusual experience that causes their perception to warp a little bit even further, and imagine that, it wasn't a Sasquatch. It had a sheep's head or something. And, we could attribute that to a lot of different things, the conditions, the lighting, who knows what else. But, then you have these other cases that really, they crystallize in such a way that you have to question the case, but at the same time you have to admit, okay, here's a core people that had this experience, and they experienced something. Was it a physical creature? I don't know. But, there's people that are adamant that they had these bizarre experiences that don't really seem to repeat very much, if at all. One of my favorite cases, actually, is the Loveland Frogman. And I love the case just because it's so bizarre, and it only repeated a small handful of times. But one of the primary witnesses was a law enforcement officer, and he stood by his testimony of having seen this thing, and he says that he saw a large, 4-foot bipedal frog that clambered over a guardrail and slink down to the river. And why under any circumstances would a man like that, with a new career in law enforcement, why would he make something like that up? And if you take away the possibility that, he was under the influence of anything, which of course the other police officers would have realized very quickly, then you're left with this burning question. what caused him to have that experience? You know, what conditions occurred? You know, what were the circumstances, and why did this happen? You know, that he had this very real physical experience. I don't know. You know, there's a lot of things that we could speculate on, but it all is just speculation, unfortunately. So, you know, to answer your question, I think, again, there's not a singular answer, but some of these creatures, I believe, are very real physical manifestations, and others are a big, huge question mark that we have to try to decipher as we continue to research this field.
Are there certain cryptids or stories out there that you strongly believe are just man-made in trying to get attention? If so, do you have an example or two?
Oh, boy.
I'll put you on a real tight timeline. We got to, you know what? We can get to that next time as well, because I'm just looking at the clock here. Once again, the hour has gone by extremely fast. Last hour I went to, and I had to cut you off. I wanted you to let people know where they could find your books. Do you mind throwing that out there right now?
Oh, yeah. Amazon.com is the best place because there's, you know, they're all on there. The re-release of Black-Eyed Children will be up on Amazon probably by the end of the year, hopefully sooner. And, you know, I've got an author page on Amazon, so you can follow me for updates on new releases and everything. That's really the best place at this point. I also have a blog at twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com. And I haven't updated it much in the last couple of months, but I'll be putting some stuff up on there. And there are hot links for all the books on there, too.
All right, David Weatherly, our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio, talking everything cryptid, because that's what we do when Dave comes on every second month, usually in the final week of the month, because, well, he just loves this show, and we love having him on. Hour number 3 of Spaced Out Radio coming up. Once again, it's unscripted. Don't know where it's going. Maybe we'll leave it to you, the audience, coming up right after this. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. Stick around. We got one more hour to go on tonight's show. We'll be back right after this.
We're getting strange on Saturday nights. Hi there, this is Dave Cruz, and each Saturday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I will take you on a tour of the weird and obtuse on Spaced Out Saturdays. From aliens to Sasquatch and every tinfoil hat in between, we got you covered. Join us at spacedoutradio.com for Spaced Out Saturdays. See you there.
Not ready for bed on Saturday night? Right after Spaced Out Saturdays, hop on over to S4 with Corey Ruiz and me, Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. With S4, there are no limits to what we try and uncover. From government conspiracies to helping clean up the paranormal, no topic is safe on S4. We get to the heart of the matter, of the subjects you want to learn more about. So tune in on S4 starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, only on spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Would you like someone you can trust to look into it? We have just the place. The SOR Sightlines Report is the place for you to find answers, whether it's Bigfoot, UFOs, Dogman, ghosts, aliens, or anything strange. The Sightlines Report will get you connected with one of our expert researchers to find out what's going on. All of your personal information is kept 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines Report, a place for you to find the answers you need. Only at spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there. I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4COP. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Do you want to know the truth? Do UFOs exist? Are aliens real? Are the governments hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO seekers, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow along with us as we journey across the United States, visiting UFO hotspots and alien hotspots, trying to document the UFO phenomenon. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
It's Cosmic Sundays with me, Elizabeth Anglin, in Cosmic Passport. Let me take you down a 3-hour spiritual journey where we will get into everything from ET contact to Psychic Sundays. It's a journey of listening and learning together with some of the best professionals in their fields. You can tune in to Cosmic Passport at spacedoutradio.com every Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, Ian Holt is back. We get into all things paranormal and wherever we decide to go. It's always unscripted with Ian, much like with Dave Weatherly tonight. So, I don't know where it's going to go. It's just going to happen. We'll get into some freaky stuff because it is a week before All Hallows Eve. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, at over 160 countries around the world. We are also live on KTLK, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio like Stardust Man right now, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Valetudinarian. Valetudinarian is your password. Nobody knows what it means, but it is your password for the night, so please use it wisely if you're a member of the SOR Space Travelers Club. We're also, if you want to check us out, on social media, on Twitter, at Spaced Out Radio. Use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio if you want to connect live with me during the show. You can also give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Listen to us on iHeartRadio in the United States, TalkStream Live. Tune us in on TuneIn, download and subscribe to our shows on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month, rock out to some Bumblefoot, shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. You can also read The Encounter online or watch great videos from UFO seekers and Contact TV, everything at spacedoutradio.com. For the final time tonight, we introduce David Weatherly, author extraordinaire when it comes to all things haunted and cryptid. You can find all of his books on Amazon in any major bookstore. David, welcome back.
Thanks, man.
Oh, no problem. No problem at all. I figure we would just get into some audience questions here because they are building up, and you know we always like to get the audience involved in this show. Milo is asking, do you believe that there are cryptids out there that can shapeshift?
That's an interesting question because, one of the things I've looked at very closely, being kind of a desert guy and spending a good portion of my life in the Southwest, one of the things that I've looked at a lot and been fascinated by is the topic of skinwalkers. And the entire idea of the skinwalker is built around the ability to shapeshift. So, whether this is a physical shape-shifting transformation, I honestly don't have an answer for it. But I will tell you that, after speaking to so many Native American people and non-natives too have experienced these things, it's pretty, it presents a pretty fascinating possibility. And furthermore, I had a very strange experience. I don't think I've ever talked about this on the show, Dave. I haven't told the story a whole lot of times, but a year and a half ago, I did a lecture on skinwalkers, and I was openly telling this account that I experienced around the Four Corners region. In fact, it was on what was formerly Highway 666, the highway to hell. I was driving across this stretch of road in late at night, and I was in a large truck. It was a moving truck. I was driving probably around 45 miles an hour, and as I'm cruising along, there's no other traffic. The natives won't travel this region at night. They just won't. And as a result, certainly back then there was never much traffic on this area. And as I'm driving, I saw out of my peripheral vision something on the side of the road kind of running along. And, it kind of stole a glance over. And my first thought was coyote, because there are a lot of coyotes out there. And I'm noticing that this thing is sort of running. It's on the side of the road, but it's running, pacing the truck, and it starts making these darting motions towards the truck. Now, I'm glancing over at it, and I'm thinking, that's awful large. I've seen tons of coyotes over the years. thinking that's awful large for a coyote. It could be a wolf. And I'm looking at the tail and the form of this canid and thinking, yeah, it could be. Now, that would be unusual, not completely impossible, but certainly unusual for the region. And I'm watching this thing, and it starts sort of making runs at the cab. It would dart in and then back to the side of the road. So now I'm getting concerned that this animal is going to run in front of the truck and cause me to swerve and possibly wreck. So I, logic dictates I'll speed up a little bit and outpace this thing. So I start to speed up, and this animal keeps pace. So, I had slowed down some to look closer at it. So I'd get back up to 40, 45. I hit 50, 55. This thing is still pacing the truck. And when I start getting up to a higher speed, 50, 60 miles an hour, this thing not only continues to keep pace with the truck, but in mid-stride, it suddenly goes from being a four-legged canid to standing upright on two legs and pacing the truck. I tried to speed up more and realized I was approaching an area of the road that curves, so I had to start to slow down. And when I did, this thing that I was seeing very clearly at this point darted off to the side of the road, jumped some rocks, and went off into the canyon and was gone. And I'll tell you, it's one of the weirdest, creepiest experiences I've ever had in my life, still to this day. And of course, I talked to people about it afterwards. I talked to native friends, and, one of my Navajo friends said, why are you driving that road that time of night? And that's, don't you realize that's skinwalker territory? So, this is, hands down, all the native guys I talked to said, you just had a close run-in with a skinwalker and you're lucky to still be here. So you asked me a question about shape-shifting, and I don't know quite how to answer because this thing, I physically saw it go from 4 legs to 2 in mid-stride. And like I said, that's nothing like anything I've experienced before.
I have not experienced the shape-shifting of that sort. I am a firm believer. I know up here, First Nations believe that Sasquatch is either a shapeshifter or interdimensional, and that's why we haven't found a body or really any fair traces, or footprints just seem to disappear. Like you'll see it.
That's pretty common with native cultures around the Americas, yeah.
Absolutely. And I know a couple weeks ago, Bazooka Joe and I were out at our Sasquatch gifting site that we have set up. And we had the feeling, and I call my buddy Mark Bazooka Joe because, this guy's armed to the teeth with absolutely everything. So it's just so much more fun. So when we go into that area, because there is grizzly bears, black bears, and all sorts of cats, from cougars to bobcats and lynx, it's a dangerous area where we put our gifting site. And you'll understand, Dave, because you've done enough research on these topics, but for people who haven't had the experience or understand what we're talking about, we're out there and we go by where one of the footprints is, and it's now starting to get pretty beat up from all the bear and rabbits and deer that seem to use that area. And we finish up at the gifting site, go over to the footprint, and as we're there, both Mark and I get the feeling like we are being watched. And that's when all of a sudden, to Mark's left, somewhere in the trees that we couldn't see, we hear this very loud thump of real heavy footsteps into the ground. And so Mark very loudly cocks his gun. And of course we see nothing. And we stand there for about 15, 20 minutes because we just had that feeling, that even though we couldn't see them, that we were being watched, whether it was by the Sasquatch or whether it was by some other animal out there. And it's funny because to my right, I was looking down this path that went about, I'm going to say 150, 200 feet. And when you're looking down a path through the trees, yes, there's a lot of pareidolia that happens, and I never saw anything that I recognized or anything like that. But I kind of said out loud, I said, I need a sign that you're over there, because I feel you. I feel you watching me. Give me a sign. And probably 5 to 10 seconds after I said that, the squirrel in the area that is over by where I was looking starts chattering away. And if you know the outdoors, the one thing that I've learned from Mark is the squirrel is nature's alarm.
All right.
And what happens is, if there are humans around, there's two things that will always tip off animals to humans. Number one, crows, and number two, squirrels.
Yep.
And this squirrel just starts chattering right below where I was staring. And Mark looks at me because he's never seen a Bigfoot. He's never had that experience. He's been tracking animals for 30 years, and the print I showed him was the first he'd ever seen. And when that squirrel went off, like 5-10 seconds after I had, kind of voiced my opinion into that area, or my attention into that area, Mark goes, well, there's your sign of that you are being watched. And I'm like, yeah, that's a little surreal right there. A little surreal. So I know I would like to see some shape-shifting. I don't know if I would want an encounter with a skinwalker, and I'm glad the skinwalkers aren't up here. Yeah. But I did a few months ago receive an email from a gentleman about, he's about 5-6 hours north of me, about a dogman sighting, which would be the first one that I know of in British Columbia.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know there were a couple of sightings reported in Nova Scotia.
Right.
Of all places. And there's been a few from, I can't remember, one of the other provinces up there. So, I know there have been some reported out of Canada. But yeah, I don't recall any in British Columbia right off.
Let's get to some more questions here from our audience. Adam is asking, could any of these be man-made, like cloning experiments when we deal with the cryptids?
The original sightings of the chupacabras in Puerto Rico were linked to government experiments. So that sort of brings up an intriguing possibility, and especially when we look at all of the strange experiments that we are aware of that the government has done, with genetically modifying animals and so forth. So, even, recently I think that maybe that's something that could be more of a possibility going forward with some of these things. And of course, we also have the environmental mutations that occur. There's strange animals, for instance, that have been sighted around Chernobyl, and that may be a result of the radiation. The other environmental factors that may be altering some animals that, to us previously were possibly normal, but now are becoming some kind of strange hybrids. The Texas chupacabras, the Texas blue dogs, as they're sometimes called, are another good example of that. There's specimens of those that have been captured, and they're a strange hybrid, wolf-coyote hybrid, and it's causing something that's causing the mutation of the appearance and the skin and so forth. So, yeah, I think that's something that we have to be conscious of, and of course, look at regional factors when we're looking at individual cases. Are there government, facilities around? Are there scientific, experimental facilities around and so forth. Some notorious ones around the country, like Plum Island and so forth. But, I think that's a potential.
Well, this leads to Rachel's question, and it is very interesting indeed, because there's been so much talk recently about connecting humans to artificial intelligence and being chipped and everything. So she's wondering, with all the meta-human talk and movies coming out, are they considered cryptids as well these days?
A meta-human? No, I don't think you would consider that a cryptid. That gets into very strange territory, obviously, because we're advancing scientifically so fast that technology, there's a lot of scientists now who even say that eventually technology and humans will meld to a certain degree, creating, a cyborg, or, I don't know what you would term it, but, essentially a different form of life. But I don't think we're quite at that point yet. There's a lot of things being done behind the scenes, of course, and there are people that have, implanted themselves with chips and so on. But, we've got a little bit more time before that's very widespread.
Let's get to Ron's question. As we just heard about your cryptid encounter with potentially a skinwalker, Ron is asking, have you ever had any experience with attachments by entities?
When I started in this field, I kind of ran a parallel track with studying shamanism and studying with a lot of native teachers from different cultures around the world. So my perspective on the phenomena has always been a very open-minded approach, but I've also always had a personal series of things that I do in order to protect myself, because I do believe that is a potential and a danger in a lot of these situations. So I have had situations, certainly, where things have tried to attach to me or tried to follow me from locations, but I haven't been possessed or anything like that. I have, as I said, I've had things tried very, very hard. There's one particularly nasty location that I've investigated on several occasions in Indiana, and whatever is in that house has possessed people before. And I know for a fact when I was in there, it attempted to possess all of us that were there. There were 3 of us investigating that night, and it tried in turn to possess each one of us. And it's a very strange experience when that's happening. But fortunately, my protections have held in those situations.
Gloria, I think, has a very interesting question, because with everything that happened around Fukushima, there's been a lot of radiation come around, and she's wondering if there's been any weird creatures sighted since the Fukushima disaster.
Yeah, there have been a few. I was in Japan a couple of years ago, and there are a few cases. I personally believe there are more than we're hearing about yet, because the Japanese are very reluctant to talk about a lot of those things too openly, simply because the government continues to affirm to the Japanese citizens that everything's fine. That Fukushima's cleaned up and there's no worries. And it's a very bizarre situation to go and to interact with some of these people who really are kind of programmed to believe that whatever the government tells them, it's all correct. Everything's okay. Because they're just not, their culture is just not one that questions authority in that sense, by nature. So, it's really weird to see that side of people saying, Fukushima, it's all clean, there's no issue. And then the very small number of people who will say, No. This is a very bad situation. There's a lot of people dying. There are a lot of strange things happening as a result of Fukushima. And there are a handful of reports. There were reports of and I've never been able to really validate these, but there are a few reports of a Mothman-like creature appearing right before Fukushima. If those cases are real, then that's pretty intriguing, because it's back to the idea that Mothman is some kind of omen, for the coming disaster. There had been a few reports in the aftermath of Fukushima of mutated ocean life, and it's not believed or commonly known in Japan, but in other areas it's well known that the Japanese government is actually digging up waste from the Fukushima site and dumping it out at sea. So you've got incredibly contaminated material being dumped into the ocean that in turn, of course, affects the seafood that all of these people are eating on the Japanese coast. And, inevitably you get a few weird reports here and there of, strange mutated squids, mutated fish, just a couple of the things that I've heard from there. I heard a case of a claim of a two-headed dog that someone had seen that came from the Fukushima area. So, at this point, just a very small spattering of accounts. And of course, as this continues to go forward, the years move forward from Fukushima, we're apt to see much more. And a lot of that could be explained from the mutation via the radiation. There's other weird stuff too. There's a lot of reports of people seeing ghosts in the Fukushima area. And in fact, there's been a number of reports of taxi cab drivers picking up people that they retrieve, and then when they take them to the requested address, they find that the passenger
We're going to have to get Dave back. His phone seemed to have hung up there. So just give me a quick second, and we'll get Dave right back on the phone. I hope his phone didn't die. We'll soon see.
Blame the Japanese government.
Well, exactly. You see, this is what happens when you're not wearing your tinfoil hat during this show.
That's right.
I'll let you continue on with your story.
I don't know where I got cut off. What was the last you heard?
About the mutations going on.
Oh, okay. So, so there's reports of the mutations. There was a random report I received about a two-headed dog being spotted in the Fukushima area, as well as a few other strange things, mutated ocean life and so forth. And I suspect that as the years move forward, we'll continue to hear more things, just like we did from Chernobyl, a limited number of things because of the effects of the radiation. And beyond that, there are, over the last few years, a number of cases of ghosts from the Fukushima area. And in fact, there's a number of reports from taxi cab drivers in Japan who say they've picked up passengers who get in their cab and request the address, and the taxi driver takes them to the desired location. And when they arrive at the location, they find that the person in their cab has vanished, and that it turns out that the person they had picked up purportedly died during Fukushima. So it's a interesting version and kind of a twist on the Phantom Hitchhiker that is somehow connected to the Fukushima disaster. But again, quite a number of these reports. So here again, we come full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show, the idea of these wandering souls, trying to make contact or maybe finish, something so that they can be at peace or cross over.
And because the Japanese culture is so limited in what they have released to the public about this. Do you think we'll ever get the real story about what is actually hiding around those areas? I mean, with Chernobyl, we hear stories about, 6-foot wolves that are running around, and that's on their forelegs, not their bipedal legs. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't, we were talking about two cultures. The Russians and the Japanese are both very closed cultures in a sense. And we've been fortunate that we've even gotten as much as we have out of the, Chernobyl region. A lot of that's only because Russia has opened up a lot more. But Japan is a whole different story. And the thing is, as I was saying earlier, they're a culture that is really hardwired to accept and believe whatever the government tells them, whatever authority figures say. So, the bulk of the population believes there's no problem, that Chernobyl is all cleaned up. And there's a lot of things that are swept under the rug. There's all this radioactive waste that's being dug up out of Fukushima and dumped out at sea. And, everybody turns their heads and just ignores it because they're told, the official party line is that everything's fine. It's all cleaned up. And, when we get down even to bare basics, the cancer rates have skyrocketed in those regions and other types of illness. So I seriously doubt that we'll ever know the full depth of the effects of what's happened there, except what we're able to get from the outside, so to speak, and the small number of reports that will continue to surface because, Fukushima affected a pretty wide area. So the radioactive effects from that is going to affect not just humans, but also animal life for a long time. And it's inevitable that we will continue to get some more reports of some of the strange things that this has caused.
All right, from Japan to Antarctica, Robin is asking, what has been in Antarctica recently? Have you heard any reports of strange animals or sightings there? Because it just is a very strange place that the government doesn't tell us too much about.
Yeah, I know. There's always, little bits and pieces of things coming out of Antarctica, and of course the rumors of everything from buried pyramids to, entrances to an underground city and so forth. And of course, it's been a place that has fascinated people for, ages. And of course, there's rumors of the Nazis having been there and everything else. I haven't heard anything new recently outside of some UFO reports in the Antarctic region. No, nothing recent I think of in terms of cryptids or anything down there. But again, it's an area that it's very hard to get information out of. Not a lot of people go there, obviously, and a good portion of the people that do experience it are, scientific or government teams, and they release very little information to us.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to Rachel's question here. The Wendigo has been called a demon spirit changing from human into a creature. But is it a popular myth, cryptid, or some sort of spirit?
I think the origins of the Wendigo go back to a more, if you dig into the native lore around this creature, I really think we're talking about something that was originally a spirit, type of evil spirit. And if you look at the accounts, it's a entity that can possess a person. And of course, the whole story around the Wendigo is that it can cause a person to transform, that their heart turns to ice, and of course they become cannibals. So it's a frightening spirit, and at the same time, it seems to have some very strong connections to the native tribes' belief system in terms of these darker entities that can come out of the forest and affect the tribe. Again, this is something that you find in different versions around the world. This dark spirit, almost a boogeyman that exists out there in the wild, and that can take physical, tangible form to some degree. And again, I know this has kind of been my theme tonight, but no, I don't think there's any one explanation to cover all of the cases of such things. A situation like this, and an entity like this, we may be dealing with cases of possession. We may be dealing with, some of the early accounts simply could be someone who experienced a psychological breakdown or, some other type of trauma that drove them crazy and, caused bizarre behavior to manifest. If that's a spiritual entity of some type, a native may say that it is. A clinical doctor may say, no, this is psychological. But, we have to sort of, I have to sort of walk that middle line and say, well, both things are potential.
This leads to BTO's question, who is asking, do you believe all cryptids are natural or that they can be artificially created via some sort of hybridization?
Oh, I think that both are the case. I think there are some that are natural, but I certainly believe that some can be a result of hybrids. I spoke earlier about the Texas blue dogs, the chupacabras, and that's a cryptid, so to speak, but it's also a strange hybrid that has occurred for, due to environmental conditions and so forth. So yeah, both are possible.
Do you believe that it could be tied to some sort of MK Ultra program, especially with human shape-shifting like the Wendigos?
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I wouldn't tend to tie the whole MK Ultra thing into cryptids. I think there's two different tracks of things going on there.
Well, let's get to Don's question here. Could you explain, David, what the government angle is on the chupacabra?
I haven't really heard much of anything from the government angle, unless she's talking about the angle from Puerto Rico that involved a series of government experiments reportedly to create some kind of hybrid creature and resulted in the Puerto Rican version of the chupacabra, which looks completely different from the canid. For those who haven't ever seen a depiction of this thing or heard descriptions of it, it's a very bizarre creature. It's bipedal, with very large, oversized eyes, small front limbs, and a series of spikes running down its back. And that was the original chupacabra, actually. The cases involving that thing, related to all of these animals turning up or their blood sucked dry, and, the vampiric aspect was attached to these creatures. And there were so many strange reports revolving around this thing, one of which involved some kind of government installation and the idea that this thing had gotten loose from a secret government base and was terrorizing the community in Puerto Rico. So that rash of sightings, really created the whole beginnings of the chupacabra stories. And then later on, much later on, we get the version in the American Southwest, Texas, and even down in Mexico that depicts the chupacabra as a more canid type of animal, but again, still sucking the blood out of its victims. So, yeah, that's the government angle that I'm aware of in terms of the chupacabra.
Do you think the government knows a lot about these creatures, Dave? I mean, there has to be a reason why, with so many people annually seeing Sasquatch in the forests everywhere around North America, that there hasn't been any type of confirmation. And it even goes back to Mount St. Helens, where apparently people witnessed Chinook Army helicopters picking up dead Sasquatch and taking them off the mountain.
Yeah, there's a lot of those stories around, Dave. I talked to a woman a few years ago from North Carolina who swears that she encountered she saw a Sasquatch body, and that a unmarked government van showed up and took this thing away. And ironically, she was a law enforcement officer too. She was off duty and she was actually a dispatcher, worked for sheriff, I believe, dispatching unit. But this has been kind of a common thing. It's not something I've dug into a whole lot, but I've certainly encountered it a lot where people are saying, "Oh, the government knows, the government knows." And I guess to a certain degree, we could certainly say it's definitely true, because I've talked to enough park rangers who believe that these things are real, and that, hey, they're government employees. Whether there's some secret government organization who's taking care of Sasquatch bodies or is hyper aware of what's going on, I can't say. It's certainly a fascinating aspect to the whole study, and you get into all these weird conspiracies involving the government knowing and being aware of these creatures. But I don't know. It's certainly possible. It would be pretty typical for the government to know a lot more than they're letting us know, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I know around here, the rumor is, if you want to learn about where all the Sasquatch are hiding, because forestry is a big industry around here, people always say go to the land surveyors, meet and befriend the land surveyors around here, because they are the ones who are having to go square off these pieces of land where the forestry companies can go in there and cut down the trees, and they are the ones actually finding a lot of weird stuff. However, they are told by the forestry companies to keep it very, very quiet, because they don't want the government coming in there and saying, well, we may have this creature in there, you can't cut down the wood. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But they are finding everything from structures to footprints to some very odd things around here.
Yeah, interesting.
And there are signs that people have to look for. When you go out on an investigation, are there certain signs, whether it's paranormal, whether it's cryptid, that you were looking for to convince you that there is something going on?
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. And it depends on the region, because they'll behave different in different parts of the country. So there's definitely certain things you look for. And, of course, even beyond the basics, if you find tracks, of course, that's gold if you find a footprint. But there's a lot of other consistencies, and if you go into an area that is even a rural area, you start talking to some of the people who live in the region, and you'll find a lot of consistent things, certain noises that they're hearing, encounters maybe that they've had, things that are disappearing. A good example is up in the Four Corners region on the reservation. There was a whole series of events that I investigated at one point, and I found out that a lot of the people we were taught to in the region reported that their supplies for feeding their farm animals were being raided. So, whether it was corn or whatever they had, their feed, they would find that it was getting emptied. It was being dipped into. So, these creatures are intelligent enough to know where to go and get a free meal, an easy meal. And of course, just like any other animal, you have to look for water sources and, incidents around, whether it's a river or a lake or a pond or whatever. And those are just some of the common things. But yeah, there's definitely themes, and there's definitely certain things you look for. And you have to familiarize yourself with the wildlife in the region and the natural aspects of the region too.
What do you prefer to look for? I don't think I've ever asked you that.
In terms of just what I do in general?
Yeah, like when you are out, do you prefer sticking with the cryptids, black-eyed kids, aliens? Do you prefer the ghosts? Or is it all pretty even for you?
It's usually pretty even for me, because when I got interested in this stuff as a kid, I was interested in all of it. Quite honestly, and it all consistently stays pretty fascinating to me. I people ask me that all the time if I have a preference, and I usually say, well, it depends on probably when you ask me and what I've been busy doing, but I don't know. I don't think I could give any of it up completely, but I don't know that I have that much of a preference. I think I probably gravitate a lot more towards the haunted stuff than I do the other things, and I don't know whether that's just because of opportunity or what, but I try to take a very holistic view of the whole field, and it's all amazing and fascinating to me.
Question coming up from Gloria here. Have you ever investigated the story of the mysterious staircases to nowhere in the wilderness?
God, I've been asked about this constantly for months now, and I've had a few people send me pictures. It's very strange to me because a couple of years ago, probably 3 years ago, when I was in Europe on a trip, somebody brought this topic up and showed me a photograph of one they found in the UK. And I wasn't able at the time to get out to the location, but I don't know what to make of this, to tell you the truth. I haven't had a chance to investigate any of the sites, but there's something going on with it, because I've heard this more and more, especially over this past year. And, any of the listeners who have actual photographs or specific locations of some of these, I invite you to send them to me. I get a chance, I'll certainly check it out.
I'm going to be honest, that's the first time I've heard about that. That would scare the living daylights out of me, coming up to a stairwell that goes nowhere. Yeah, they're very bizarre cases, and I don't know, exactly what to make of it, like I said, because I haven't had the opportunity to get out and actually examine it or check any of them out. Let's get to a question from Ron here, who is asking, do cryptids function at a higher frequency than humans in your belief?
I don't know if I'd say a higher frequency. There's a common native belief that, for instance, Sasquatch is sort of in a different realm of existence to a certain degree than humans are. And that explains, for instance, why trackways will just suddenly stop in the middle of nowhere, why people will see them one moment and they'll vanish another moment. It's an intriguing possibility. The native beliefs are pretty consistent because, there's this talk that these creatures are, in modern terms, we might say interdimensional. And, of course, that flips out a lot of traditional cryptozoologists who can't, grasp anything beyond the concept that these are simply physical animals that we just haven't proved yet. But, to me, for these cases, there's far too many of these cases that have paranormal aspects. And that doesn't mean that I believe they're ghosts or anything. It's just that, there are things that we don't yet understand how they're able to do these things. And, if that means that they can somehow slip into a different vibration or something, I don't know, maybe that's what's going on. I think that it's an intriguing possibility for sure.
Do you like the alien aspect of this crypto world?
Just in terms of UFO cases and so forth?
Yeah. Do you enjoy that, or do you think it's a little overdone? I early on did a lot of research into UFO cases. I still occasionally delve into some of it. I've done it less so in the last few years because I find the politics of ufology despicable. So I tend to stay outside of that a little bit, enough that, I do it for my own personal pursuits and research. And some of the cases I'm just incredibly intrigued by. Some of the classic cases, the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins, which is considered a UFO counter, I think is just really fascinating. The Zanfretta case from Italy is something that I've delved into some, and it's probably
one of the most incredible, fascinating UFO cases, and the least examined in a lot of ways, that really deserves a lot of attention, because so many witnesses. The Italian military police investigated the case, and physical evidence, just so many aspects to that case. And outside of Italy, it really hasn't received a lot of attention. And even in Italy, there's not a lot of people that are aware of it now. But amazing set of encounters. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but yeah, some of those cases, I find them just incredible. And it's ufology, I think, is inevitably going to have to change over the next couple of years so that we can make more progress in determining exactly what's going on there. We've kind of fallen into this routine that every president is going to be the disclosure president. Every year is going to see government disclosure. Every year this is going to happen. And I think we need to step beyond that and keep doing the work ourselves, as researchers. I know a lot of people that are actually out there doing some incredible work in the field, and I have a lot of respect for it. But like I said, we've been so overshadowed with the politics of ufology the last couple of years that it's been disheartening for a lot of people, I think. All these scandals and the silliness in some of the media and, so forth. It's almost as if that's an intentional distraction again thrown into the field. So, yeah, I still research it. I just do it sort of behind the scenes for the most part.
So what was your thoughts then? Because I'm pretty sure you would have checked out, hard not to, all of the information brought forward by Tom DeLonge in his To the Stars press conference.
Yeah. I was at the International UFO Congress last year when they awarded DeLonge they gave him an award for, I think Researcher of the Year or something. And it aggravated so many people. It was curious to me to see the kind of hardcore researchers and, people that had done a lot of serious things, sitting there not getting any attention. And here's this guy who's, face it, he's getting an award because, well, he's a well-known star in other matters and decides to step into ufology. I still remain, I don't really pass any kind of judgment or anything on that. I'm just kind of playing the wait and see game to see what happens with what DeLonge does. I haven't been overly impressed with any of it yet, but I'm not, I'm not unimpressed either. I think it's great that a celebrity is stepping in and going out on a limb, but we'll see what happens.
I want to ask you two more questions about that, and then we'll move on, because we've beaten that topic ad nauseum here over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we would have to, considering what we talk about. Are you surprised at all that there is absolutely nothing to do with disclosure or UFOs on the To the Stars Academy website, if they're about disclosure?
No, that doesn't surprise me.
Now I'm curious why.
Disclosure, that's a topic I think has been beaten into the ground. What exactly are people trying to accomplish? I mean, it's kind of, it's been one of those things I've always just kind of sat back and chuckled a little bit to the degree that, people are trying so hard. There's such an effort to force the government into disclosure. And and this is me personally, I don't have any personal confidence that the government is going to suddenly decide, hey, we're releasing everything we have on UFOs. And let's be honest, if they did step out and say that they were doing that, would you honestly believe that they had? Would you?
It all depends on what that information was. I tend to think I'm a little bit more educated than the majority of the public out there, because I do this every night and I'm an experiencer, and there is a lot of people who are more experienced and understanding about everything than I am,
Right.
I think it would really depend on what they are actually saying.
I think, it's interesting because I think that people are, I don't know, maybe they're barking up the wrong tree is the way to phrase this, by putting so much time and effort into trying to force government disclosure, because I'm just not expecting any huge revelation from the U.S. government in terms of UFOs. I am fully confident that there's a lot of information there, that they know a lot, and that if they do eventually release some information, it'll be interesting. But I just don't personally believe that it will be everything that they know. I just don't. I know that other smaller countries have released a lot of their UFO files, and most of those countries are not countries that have had none of them have had the depth of military-industrial complex that the United States has. So that alone causes them to have less information than the U.S. is going to have. And what these countries have released, it's been fascinating, but it's been, a lot of basic files. It confirms things. It confirms, okay, well, the Brazilian Air Force chased this UFO on this date and this incident happened. And, in the grand scheme of things, we can certainly draw a lot from that and have a pretty fascinating tapestry of what's been going on a larger scale. But I just, again, this is a personal thing for me. I don't believe in the all-out effort to force U.S. government disclosure. I don't think it's going to happen until the government is forced in a different way to disclose. If aliens suddenly decide to drop down, in downtown Chicago and make their presence known to the masses, then suddenly the government is forced to deal with it. But I don't think a lobbying group is going to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. They haven't yet in lobbying the government for it. Stephen Bassett's been trying
for years.
Stephen Bassett's been trying for 20 years. Stephen Greer before him. It just hasn't worked. My other question is, though, DeLong has kind of gone on the defensive, even though his site doesn't list anything on UFOs or disclosure. But he's saying that we don't want aliens to come here. Aliens are bad. They are evil. They're going to come take us over and destroy this planet, and that's why we got to keep our nuclear weapons, because apparently they're afraid of them. Do you think this is fear-mongering, or that he has potentially been tapped into because of this? Because there are so many people out there, Dave, who have had positive ET experiences, and I know that's a big question. We only got about 90 seconds left, my friend.
90 seconds, thanks. Oh, wow. Well, a lot of things get called fear-mongering, but, where's the line drawn? Okay, well, he's professing what he believes, and, yeah, you could say it's fear-mongering, but if that's what he believes, then, more power to him for following his vision is what I would say. I don't know. We could argue both sides of the whole alien question, because there are just as many people that have had negative and terrifying experiences with what appear to be extraterrestrials. It's one of those questions involving topics of the supernatural that we don't yet have an answer to. I think that you have to pursue your own beliefs in terms of it, and we've got everything from the Catholic Church coming out saying, okay, well, if aliens come down, we'll welcome them into the church. To people like DeLong saying, we got to build more nuclear weapons to keep the aliens away. I don't know. A lot of people are saying, no, this guy's a plant, or he's tampered with, he's a front. But again, that's ufology, man. It's inevitable. It seems that everybody who comes along as a major player in ufology has this controversy around them. Oh, they're working for the government. Oh, they're disinformation agents. They're just a nutty contactee believer.
We're all nutty, Dave. We're all nutty. How about give it a quick shout-out for your website, once again, where people can find your books?
Absolutely. Check out Amazon.com. There's an author page on there. Please follow it. You'll get updates on new releases. twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com is the other location to keep up on me. I'm on Facebook, and you can also check out Society of the Supernatural, both on Facebook, and hey, Google that on YouTube, because there's some really cool stuff that just got put up from our investigations at Ripley's.
David Weatherly, we will talk to you just after Christmas in 2 months' time, because that's when you're usually here, every 2 months, and we appreciate you always stopping by SOR headquarters. Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rocking in the background with little brothers watching. Bumblefoot rocks us in and out of every show. Tomorrow night at Spaced Out Radio, Ian Holt will be back. We'll get into everything paranormal starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. Want to say thank you to my great team putting this invention of SOR together with me. But most of all, I thank all of you, the fans, in the chat rooms, taking part on Twitter. You make it a lot of fun. You were great tonight. Let's do it all again tomorrow. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Talk to you in 21 hours. Good night.